Thank you, Professor Lu, and thank you, Dr. Gooding, Dr. Babin, for organizing the conference. So my research is entitled "The Sneakily Sickly Ghost of Colonialism: A Historical Contextualization of the MV Wakashio Oil Spill in Mauritius." So I'm basically studying the entanglement of this oil spill with some historical uh, dilemmas in the southwestern island of Mauritius from colonial to post-colonial times. And what are these entanglements? Well, in Mauritius, whether you add sugar to your coffee or not, your life, if you're living in Mauritius, is entangled with this crop called sugarcane. And this MV Wakashu oil spill actually brought to the forefront this crop again and debates surrounding this crop. And this particular research project is actually part of a wider research project where I'm looking at the entanglement of this crop with mobility, disease, and climate from the British colonization, when there were debates on railways and malaria related to the sugarcane plantations, to currently where there are debates on a new spatial reimagining of Mauritius through an LRT network and smart cities. So within this shift from colonial to post-colonial times in Mauritius, where sugarcane plantations have been omnipresent, we have seen a lot of contradictory decision-making process. But in this particular presentation, I will focus on the MV Wakasho oil spill, which occurred in July 2020. Now, what was the contemporary and what is the contemporary context of Mauritius, both during the oil spill and subsequently after? Mauritius has witnessed a sharp decline in democracy, and this has been analyzed by several reports. One of the prominent ones was by the Vidam Institute at the University of Gothenburg. And Mauritius was an outlier in this report because it has been a democracy for over 40 years. And in the last 5 years, there has been a sharp decline in democracy, where opposing voices were almost strangled, and peaceful protests were also dispersed. So this oil spill occurred within such a tense circumstance. So on July 2020, on the 25th July 2020, the MV Wakashu, a Japanese ship bearing a Panamese flag, was sailing from Southeast Asia to Brazil, and it collided with the coral reefs in Mauritius in the southern part of the island, as you can see in this more high resolution map. And this particular part of the island of Mauritius is actually a marine protected area. It's a biodiversity hotspot with mangroves, sand dunes, and blooming with all kinds of marine life. And it was the worst spot for a shipwreck to happen. And 1,000 tons of oil were dispersed into the lagoon. And it's equivalent to 3 passenger planes, the weight of 3 passenger planes. So the shipwreck happened during the context of COVID-19 pandemic, where borders were still closed in Mauritius. And it so happened that there were not enough oil booms to contain that oil spill. And it was a tricky situation. How do you contain the oil spill in this sensitive area when there are no oil booms? So overnight, a group of citizens gathered in the region. We were part of an NGO, and also very political in the environmental front. And they discussed the idea of how to resolve the situation, how to prevent this oil spill from exacerbating. And the idea they proposed was to create oil booms, artisanal oil booms using sugarcane bagasse. Basically, they take a piece of fiber clothing, a long one, and the sugarcane bagasse is placed in it, and then the oil boom is wrapped along with plastic bottles to keep it afloat. And these pictures are taken by me. I was also in Mauritius at that time, and almost all Mauritians from all families participated in this effort all around the island. So all around the island, there were these centers where people came and made these oil booms. Companies were giving leaves for people to take a leave from their workplaces to go and make their oil booms. And later on, after the oil spill was contained, these oil booms were removed and disposed of. And this is one of the way which shows the entanglement of this sugarcane crop, which has been here since colonial times into this contemporary period, when there were new oil booms to contain the oil spill and artisanal ones had to be made. And this is also taken in a sugarcane factory, actually. And I will circle back to the location in the final slides. So another incident which happened, which is a bit more funnier, was that actually oil booms were later sent from Réunion Islands, and it was based on an apparent request from the Prime Minister of Mauritius on Twitter. And Emmanuel Macron, the Prime Minister of France, replied to the tweet and said that he will help Mauritius. But it turns out that this tweet was a fake tweet, despite the blue tick mark to it, and the PMO's office had to later clarify the situation. This is perhaps one of the few situations where a fake tweet was more beneficial than harmful. And of course, Emmanuel Macron's tweet is still there, but the fake tweet of the Prime Minister has been deleted and the account has been removed from Twitter. So after this oil spill was contained, and this is the second part of my presentation, there were widespread protests, both in Mauritius. In fact, this was one of the biggest protests Mauritius had witnessed, where 100,000 Mauritians participated. Roughly 1 out of every 10 Mauritians participated in these protests. And also, the protest was conducted by the diaspora abroad. The next picture on the side is from Paris. So the people were angry because the biodiversity was harmed. There were dolphins which were found dead on the shores of Mauritius, but also the people were voicing their concerns for another issue, and that issue was the incompetency within Mauritius. And this is the another colonial legacy, where in Mauritius, meritocracy has been unfortunately absent. Even the Prime Minister of Mauritius is appointed on the basis of ethnicity and caste. And this is still a very taboo subject in Mauritius, but some scholars from abroad have discussed this in explicit detail. For instance, Mathieu Cleveral's talk about how the legacy of the caste system functions in Mauritius. And the people were really actually voicing their frustration at the lack of competency and meritocracy to handle an oil spill in contemporary Mauritius. So the third layer to this colonial entanglement, the location of where the oil booms were actually later manufactured, the artisanal ones. They were manufactured in these sugarcane factories. And the interesting thing about these sugarcane factories is that these same sugarcane factories are being turned into smart cities. And interestingly enough, one of the NGOs which proposed this idea of making these artisanal oil booms later saw the idea being adopted by the owners of these sugarcane plantations. And the interesting thing here is that these NGOs and the sugarcane plantation owners have been in conflicts since a long time, and even now the conflict has exacerbated because these sugarcane factories, these former sugarcane plantations are being converted to smart cities, new spaces within this new spatial reimagining of Mauritius. And these new spatial reimagining are contradictorily not conscious of the environment. And these same NGOs have been advocating for the legal protection of these environmentally sensitive areas. And the reasoning is simple, because when converting these plantations with factories, their environmental attributes are not respected. So sometimes they are constructed on these wetlands and there are floods later on. And at other times, the same land on which these small cities could be constructed could have been used for planting food. In fact, Mauritius is facing another major issue now, which is food insecurity, because most of the food are imported. And instead of making these land into agricultural land, they're made into these smart cities. So there was and there is a tension between these different fronts, but the MV Wakashio oil spill also showed people coming together despite the divergences. But at the same time, it also was a way for people to show their real frustration alongside these meritocratic and competency issues. So this has been mainly my research right now, where I'm looking at these entanglements of sugarcane crop as this crop since colonial times to post-colonial times, where it has this very contested history. So thank you.